Okay, so welcome to this session, which is on global medical technology innovation. You know, we all know that the United States is the largest market for medical technology, but companies inside and outside the USA also know that for growth, you really do have to be looking outside the United States. And many of the promising new medical technologies are not developed in the United States, but rather around the world. And so that's kind of what's going to be going on with this session. We have two exceptional moderators who are going to serve as our guides through this very complicated and fascinating topic. First is on your right, Steve Parente, who is professor, Department of Finance in the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota, also the director of the Medical Industry Leadership Institute at the University of Minnesota, and specializes in health economics, information technology, and health insurance. And then on your left, Thomas Gundersin was a managing director and senior research analyst at Piper Jaffrey, following medical technology companies. And whenever local or national papers were covering a story on a Minnesota medical technology company, invariably they included a quote from Thomas on the topic. Since retirement, he's kept involved in healthcare, serving on the boards of for-profit and nonprofit healthcare organizations. In addition, chairs the Medical Industry Leadership Institute's Executives and Residents group here at this university. Then we have two panelists, Tim Lasky of Medtronic and Jason Mellod of Stark Condon in the UK, who will be introduced to you by our moderators. So Steve and Thomas, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. Well, wonderful to be here again. If it's April, it must be DMD. This is at least going on my second decade of attending these, and it's always a thrill to be here. Even more exciting to have this forum. I think Tom and I tried this out actually last year. I guess it proved successful enough that you asked us to come back in a bigger room and then invite others globally at the same time. So first of all, just a little bit of background about what Tom and I typically do with this. These are our Valuation Lab chats. This is going to be recorded. Normally we have a situation where we actually have them on the record and off the record. This will all be on the record, so it's a little more interesting. And actually, usually we have them as dockside and fireside chats, and I think officially now we've moved to dockside because Lake Minnetonka is now free of ice, and has been for quite some time.
He wasn't born in Minnesota, so he doesn't know that winter might not really be over yet. So
yeah, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. This is a little bit like click and clack, essentially, for med tech, actually. So it's 25 years. You'd think I'd get along, but my brother's been here 35 years, and he's like, you don't belong. So, but we're thrilled to do this. This is actually part of something we do with our group called the Medical Valuation Laboratory. It's something that we've had at the Carlson School now for 15 years, working with 8 different colleges at the University of Minnesota, particularly the College of Engineering, and also School of Medicine, which makes it great for DMD. We look at early stage medical technologies, basically using student power from all the graduate students of 8 different colleges. We've been doing it for a long time, and we brought it internationally. So one of the folks that's here virtually with us is Jason Mellod. Dr. Mellod is actually the head of Stark Codon, but also professor at the University of Cambridge, where we're embarking on our second year of doing the Valuation Lab overseas. And all of you can join us if you want. We're actually looking for 14 happy people to come along with us to join some folks in the UK to look at early stage medtech in Cambridge. To the extent whatever Jason says is exciting, you can join along. Great thing for graduate students and also alum as well. So we're gonna kick this off basically with a few questions, probably starting with Tom. After I've done my promotional routine. But the last thing to say too is that for all you budding entrepreneurs out there, the Valuation Lab is open for you. It was actually created by engineers coming to the business school saying, there's a ton of intellectual property on the cutting room floors of universities worldwide. Help get it to market, or at least assessed faster, and that's what we try to do. We do 40 a year. We'd happy to do one of yours, and you can look us up at Medical Industry Leadership Institute. You'll Google that, and you'll find us just fine. Tom, I'm going to turn the baton over to you to kick us off for this dockside chat.
Thanks, Steve. I'll just jump right into it. And Tim, Jason, say hi so I know you're live.
Hi, hope you can hear me.
Okay, gotcha. And as long as I'm putting you on the spot, tell everybody what part of the world you're in right now.
I'm in Greece, actually. So live in the UK, originally from the States, but enjoying the sunny weather in Greece. So hi, everyone.
My first question, just to kind of get us started, is from an engineering standpoint. Tim was telling me before we got started here that Medtronic now employs over 12,000 engineers. I remember when Medtronic was a small little startup, and I'm still baffled sitting here thinking about 12,000 engineers out of 95,000 employees worldwide. But then I'm curious about the arc of an engineer working with a doctor in a lab for a patient to get a pacemaker, and then those engineers going on to improve pacemakers, ICDs, et cetera. But then where does the education stop? Or advance? Where does it change customers? Because it may not be the same customer as it originally was. Can you give us a little sense of where engineering expertise is today as opposed to where it was 50 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent question. And I've been at Medtronic 31 years, so I'm viewed as an old timer now. And I know that a lot of the history and much of it relates to people that have been along the journey. And for pacing, you of course need to understand cardiac anatomy, conduction system, how to stimulate effectively, how to manage energy, and then taking it to the next level, what are the unmet needs in the different geographies, whether it's a particular arrhythmia you're trying to manage, infrastructure and ability to do the implants, level of training for the physicians, and in many cases, education of the population. They may or may not even know that pacemakers exist. And so carrying that continuum along, and it's so important that if you are a global company, to spend time with your customers. I'm in Minneapolis today. I was in Berlin yesterday at the European Heart Rhythm Association, and I travel globally and try to meet with customers in all the different geographies and really understand what are their unmet needs, and then try to advance platform technologies so that you can build upon, I guess, stand on the shoulders of giants. We started with Earl Bakken here in Seawalt Lillahai with the first battery-powered pacemaker, and then you need to learn from your history, build upon that, network, and talk to the physicians and really understand what needs do they have currently, and how can you leverage existing technology and build upon that to create new means of delivery, new means of stimulation, et cetera.
So you mentioned being overseas and talking to the customer and finding unmet needs. That also has evolved in the United States. How is it evolving in other parts of the world? Are you looking for compared to a doctor or national health or a hospital administrator in India or China or Vietnam or Brazil, are they all different, and do you have to have feet on the ground to help you with cultural differences?
Absolutely. It would be a significant mistake to assume you understand global markets without spending time there. An example I regularly bring up is India, one of the most innovative countries in the world for providing healthcare. It's often difficult for people to travel to the cities to get the healthcare. Some people have an ability to pay, some do not. And so understanding how telemedicine can help, how basic education of the population can help on things such as coronary artery disease, arrhythmias, and then work with the hospitals to try to understand how do they solve the problems. And one particular hospital called the NH Heart Hospital, they've gone to the model of providing microinsurance for people. So it's unusual for a healthcare system to provide their own insurance, but they also have a goal and vision that they'll provide care to anyone that needs it, whether they have an ability to pay or not. And there's often the perception that some of these markets just need low-cost devices. They need good quality devices and an ability to somehow finance those. And our former CEO, Omar Ishrak, had said that charity is not a sustainable business model. Not that we shouldn't be charitable, but you can't count on charity you have to find a way to make these things at least self-funding, and it may not be through that particular product, but it could be through a portfolio. And the example of NH, they have premium products for people with an ability to pay, and then they have good quality products that may require surgery, for example, to give you the same outcome, but are less expensive. And by having that broad portfolio, they can generate a bit more revenue on some of the premium products to subsidize those without an ability to pay. So you need to understand what's their goal, vision, how are they financing the whole spectrum of patients, such that we can somehow democratize healthcare, whether people have an ability to pay or not. We need to be really clever, and that's a challenge I always put out to engineers we have technical issues to solve, we have infrastructural issues to solve, and we have financial issues to solve. So be clever in how you innovate. One more thing I'll bring up that was kind of surprising, visiting the Arvind Eye Centers in India, is that if you want an appointment, you have to pay for that. If you can't afford an appointment, you wait. You get the same care, but they subsidize the system by charging people for the convenience of an appointment, which is unheard of in the United States. No one would ever imagine you'd have to pay for an appointment. But get on the ground and understand how people are cleverly solving these problems and finding a way to provide care.
Got it. One more.
Sure.
Jason, we're talking about international here, but you're based in Cambridge. I know you have U.S. roots, but a larger part of the world, since the U.S. market is international to you, how do you look at it from the entrepreneurs that want to go to the U.S. because it's a big healthcare market, but at the same time might need to do some work in getting to a level where they can go to the FDA? Do they do that in their home country, or would you recommend entrepreneurs wanting to get in the U.S. market come to the U.S. right away?
Well, it's a nuanced answer. I'm very much at the kind of, earliest stage of these innovations. Most of the companies that I invest in, the store code on, our platform, pre-seed, seed stage, might have an early device, might have an early insights engine, but very early. So in those beginning days, the UK is an excellent place to get started because there's plenty of non-dilutive grant funding from Innovate UK and other government initiatives. There's a huge swathe of, PIs that like to collaborate with these early stage opportunities, and it's actually relatively easy to set up an investigator-led clinical trial just to get some early clinical proof points by working with one of the local National Health Service Trust. Where it becomes difficult is when you get to the commercial phase. And the NHS in the UK is notorious for being one of the most, let's say, appealing yet difficult to deal with and engage with customers. It's a relatively homogenous system, although there are multiple trusts in different regions of the country and across multiple countries in the United Kingdom that all have slightly different rules that you have to get your head around. And you can quite quickly get a clinical trial set up in the UK, in some regards, probably faster than you would in the States. However, there's what we call the Delaware flip. Every company that I invest in has its eye on the concept of setting up a Delaware company, flipping to the States as quickly as possible, even from the Series A stage, to get access to the capital, the talent, and the market it needs to help its innovation become successful. And it's a real source of tension with the British government, where the concept in the UK has always been, based on something that I found, one of my friends told me, in the UK, we're very good at turning money into innovation, and in the States, we turn innovation into money. And once you get your head around that early stage innovation in the UK is so well funded and fantastic, it punches above its weight when it comes to the ability to get grants and to convert those grants into high-end publications, patents, you name it. But when it comes to actually taking those ideas from those groundbreaking innovations and turning it into a viable company, it just falls off a cliff. And so the UK government is really keen on keeping devices, keeping clinical trials, keeping commercialization in the British Isles as long as possible to achieve those unicorn status companies. Whereas what historically happens is they get gobbled up by large startups, scale-ups, and corporates in the US if they haven't flipped to the States themselves. A huge issue overarching is that if you can't get your device and your innovation into the NHS, your market opportunity is infinitely small in the UK. And because it's so challenging to get it in to the system and adopted, it's great for collaboration, it's great for early development, it's great for those proof points, but your customers aren't where your company's located. And as we all know from experience, you want to go to where your customers are. Hence, we encourage all of our companies to have a US strategy from day one.
Great, thanks.
Just to follow on and maybe a promotional thing, this is one reason why Jason and I are working together for doing the Valuation Lab. A lot of what we look at is exactly those sorts of technologies, and what our students sort of collectively look at is sort of like, how can you get to the US market, which as Jason and I talked about before, and maybe you could just elaborate on it. Brexit didn't help. Is that fair?
Steve, that was just the beginning. So Brexit didn't help, and COVID was kind of the nail in the coffin, as it were. I think there's still a lot of opportunity. I mean, having the Val Lab come in has been instrumental in helping our companies start to map out those strategies. But cutting off the UK from the rest of Europe really has created so many more challenges than we had even beforehand, when we knew that the hurdle was already higher. I think that new directives that have come through in Europe, like the European Medical Device regulations that came through, I think in 2021, have also made it a bit more challenging for small startups to go through all the layers of paperwork to get their devices, get their innovations adopted in clinics. And imagine a world where the UK is now separate from EU, higher hurdle of actually getting anything commercialized in the EU, let alone the UK. In the EU, there's multiple companies, each with their own individual regulatory bodies that you have to have approval through. And that's not just on the translation side. I mean, literal Germany is different from France, different from Spain, etc. So it's quite a hodgepodge to deal with. So I find that unless you're a very large, well-funded company, or you've got roots deeply in a particular geography and boots on the ground, it's challenging. Still lots of opportunity. I think there's a silver lining, but it's very challenging.
And then a last question and a comment for a pivot back to Tim, to Jason, or just as made comment on this. One thing I thought that was striking when I was visiting and working with a few folks is that the University of Cambridge, if you will, the entrepreneur sect, whether it be engineering, medicine, there isn't a claim essentially on the intellectual property that the university specifically makes. It seems as though they just sort of let all flowers bloom. There's not necessarily a cut that goes back. Is that true? And if it is, to the extent it is true, why do you think the university went that way? Because that is different than many American universities.
No, so on the contrary, there is a cut. It just depends on who's asking. What tends to happen here is, depending on the university, you either have set hard and fast rules where some universities in the UK take a quite hefty chunk, sometimes 30, 40, even 50% equity in a startup, just for the original IP, with commercial terms on top of that. So royalties, upfronts, milestones, in addition to 50% equity, which is one of the reasons why the UK is struggling now to really commercialize their innovations. Cambridge, Oxford, some of the large universities have a lot more flex. So depending on who is asking, who funded the innovation, how mature it is, you can get anything from no equity stake all the way up to maybe around 25%. So it's on a case-by-case basis, but they're very flexible compared to the long tail of other British universities that haven't quite gotten on board with the memo of what it takes to innovate. So it depends on who you're dealing with. So if you're fortunate enough to be at Cambridge, where they're quite entrepreneurial, quite innovative, and they're used to spinning out companies, then it's an easier deal to do than, let's say, Loughborough or Birmingham, where they're not so confident or experienced.
Thank you. And so this is an interesting pivot. So one of the things that we've done is we actually operate the Valuation Lab in China as well, in Shanghai. We actually have it part of a medical industry MBA program. And as basically post-COVID, one of the struggles we ran into was doing projects in China or finding projects in China. Basically, the idea is taking U.S. things to be looked at in China. Pretty much no U.S. inventor, save a few that were family and friends, would allow that to happen because of IP concerns. I remember, Jason, you were kind of helpful introducing us to connections in China that actually found us a Science and Technology Park connection that allowed at least the class to run. But this question comes back to you, Tim. I mean, I know you folks have a Shanghai center there. I've actually visited that way back 10 years from now. How do you balance that? I mean, that's the big concern. And we know in geopolitics, whether you sit on the left or right side of the political aisle in the United States, people all make comments about intellectual property, and yet you're doing it effectively right there.
Yes, I was at our Shanghai Innovation Center a month ago, and it's fantastic. It's maybe one of our most beautiful as far as the facilities the engineers have to work in, bringing customers in to get feedback on the products. It's quite remarkable. And we, as a technical community, we try to operate as one family. And so there's interaction between our engineers in the China facility back in Minneapolis. We have an annual science and technology fair where we try to bring everyone together. We have an Asian tech fair, European tech fair to try to exchange ideas. And one misconception is that people would be frustrated that their idea was stolen in China. And you'd ask them, did you file for intellectual property protection? They'd say, no. Well, what happens in the US and around the world when patents expire? You see generic drugs and all these things coming together. So you have to be cautious around the world, protect your intellectual property, make sure you're filing appropriately. If you're sharing your ideas, do so under non-disclosure agreements so you understand in the end who owns the intellectual property. But in a global market, we have to operate under global patent laws, respect the patent process in China, trust that people will behave ethically and will not try to take ideas. If they do, then you have the right to enforce your IP. But we're very careful in where we file, what countries we file in most aggressively, because it's on the record. I won't say so, but you can't afford to file for patent protection in every country. So you need to think, what are going to be the most important markets? And someone may be able to come into a smaller country, use your idea, but they're not taking a substantial amount of the global pie, and there's less motivation to do that. So we'll select the larger markets, and then we work closely with the governments on ensuring that we cover our IP, and then asking the government's help in helping to ensure it's protected.
That's great.
So, Tim, let's take a look at a specific example. And when I saw the title and was preparing for this talk today, your knee-jerk reaction is, okay, we're Medtronic, we've got pacemakers, and we can sell a high price, high quality in India and expand, and we can sell a value-based one that's still high quality. That's, how do we export this technology to other parts of the world? Let's look at it the other way and talk a little bit about transcatheter aortic valve replacement. This is one of the biggest innovations from a Wall Street standpoint. This really boosted 2 or 3 of the publicly traded stocks, and it was a big deal because it became a multi-billion-dollar business in an already pretty mature cardiac world. And Medtronic was at the forefront of this, but the actual technology came from France, is that right? Came from Europe.
Yeah, a couple of places. We had the core valve technology was partially out of France. We had the Melody technology, which was out of the UK, Professor Bonhoeffer. And we have Dr. Susan Alpert in the crowd. And I was the first program leader. Hi, Susan. I'm going to just put a shout out to her. I was the first program leader on transcatheter heart valves for Medtronic, and Susan was a fantastic mentor, coach, et cetera. And one thing that we did that we're particularly proud of is we had the Melody, which is a transcatheter pulmonic valve for congenital heart patients. And it's an underserved market. It was never going to be a blockbuster product, but it was an important one. And what our approach was is we can learn from Melody, we can partner with the FDA, we can understand delivery, durability, how to get such products approved, and the Melody was the first product approved. In parallel, we did the acquisition of Core Valve, which was coming out of France, and built upon both what we knew about transcatheter heart valves, how to develop them, and the relationships that we had. And within Medtronic, it's been one of our most successful businesses. And you'll often hear that it's difficult to innovate in a large company. And partially true, but in the end, we have so much engineering horsepower. If you can tap into your colleagues, you can generate tremendous momentum and ideas that no one else would come up with. At the time we started this program, Steve Osterly was a visionary, and we had expertise in heart valves. We had expertise in the corporate group and in engineering, and we had expertise in delivery from our coronary business. And what Steve pulled together was funding from each of these three groups. I had a steering committee of 3 different presidents that we had to meet with. And from the very beginning, they said, we're not going to talk about sales, who's going to get revenue. We're going to just talk about how do we engineer these products and bring them to market. And that took senior leadership like Susan and Steve to come together and say, all right, we have different business objectives in these groups, but on this particular product, it's so important to our patients, our customers, and Medtronic that you have to find a way to work together. And they created the steering committee. At the time, Bill Hawkins was the CEO, and then we would report up to Bill on a regular basis. But it takes leadership, it takes leveraging multiple business units, and Susan, of course, had a tremendous relationship with the Food and Drug Administration, which was invaluable in pulling this together.
So you mentioned
relationships drive the world. So be kind and network.
Network is clearly a theme. What I found interesting looking at this from a Wall Street perspective when it was all coming out is I think when the FDA finally approved this, it had been approved in dozens, if not scores, of other countries already, which is not usually the way things go. What was different about transcatheter heart valves that made it so time-consuming for the U.S.?
And I'll make a comment, and then maybe I could ask Dr. Alpert to comment as well. So if she could stand up as a microphone arrives. Partly with these products, as an engineer, you should always think about what is the current standard of care and what's the unmet need. And I think the FDA looked at the fact that we had really good quality surgical heart valves, and these were unknown. We didn't know about the durability. We had to learn how to deliver them, and they wanted to understand what was the patient risk-benefit ratio. And the Melody valve is a perfect example of that, where it's not the most durable valve, but the alternative surgical procedures on someone that's had multiple open heart, the risk is incredibly high. And we're always working to improve durability, but it's the risk-benefit you have to look at. And I think the FDA, and Susan, please comment on this, was particularly careful in ensuring that the risk-benefit weighed in favor of the patients.
Thank you. First of all, thank you. I'm happy to speak to this audience for sure. So yes, for those who don't know, I spent a third of my career at the FDA, including being responsible for part of that time for all of the pre-market for medical devices. And then I was in the industry. So when you sit on both sides, you get to look at what's important to the regulator, what's important to the innovator, what's important to the user. All three of them are important. They're not always exactly the same. As Tim is pointing out, the issue is the regulator, FDA in particular, is looking for benefits to outweigh risks in a defined population. So as you're thinking, you have to think, okay, what are the benefits? What are the risks? Who are the appropriate patients? Not every patient will be appropriate for every device, even if they need the population that needs heart valves. They're not all the same. So you have to think about what segments of the population need the new technology. How do you establish that the benefits outweigh the risks for that population? And then you can learn and expand. Then you can go into other things. Tim also mentioned you have to develop a relationship with the regulator. They're not going to be your friend. They're not allowed to be your friend. They can't tell you what to do, but they will react to what you tell them you are doing. So if you talk about how am I developing this valve, who's the patient population, what have I done preclinical, what have I done at the bench, what have I done in animals, what am I planning to do, is that sufficient? The regulators will answer. You propose. You can't ask, but you propose, and you will get the feedback that you need as to what their concerns are, their standards are, and how they want to work with you. I will tell you that all of the regulators around the world today are much more interactive than they've been in the past. You can meet with the regulators. Again, you propose what you want to do. You ask your questions. You can meet with regulators and get the feedback that you need in order to make sure you're on the right path with the right data and don't hit the wall, don't get delays. Take advantage of that opportunity. And it's different in the UK, it's different in other countries in Europe, it's different in Canada than in the US, although they're close. Each country has its own concerns from a different perspective about their patient population. So the culture of the country also impacts their understanding of what's the benefit and particularly what are the risks. And so you have to think about culture, you have to think about process, you have to think about all those things. And as you're hearing, you can do that with brand new products and then expand the markets. Expand within countries and expand between countries. Happy to comment, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks. And because Susan came to Medtronic, then we could be friends. Even though we are friendly and collaborative with the Food and Drug Administration. When the Melody got approved, we were high-fiving each other, and the FDA reviewers were high-fiving each other because everybody had put so much time and effort to help these pediatric patients. And one thing that happened behind the scenes on CoreValve, which was our first transcatheter aortic valve program, was in the interactions with the FDA, the team at CoreValve had said, well, the deformation of the frame that holds us in place is trivial, it's insignificant. And the FDA, of course, is saying, well, there's some deformation, you need to define that. And they went round and around with the FDA, and eventually we ran detailed CT studies to look at what were the deformations. And there's always some deformation in the body, even if it's difficult to measure. And we had to run long-term durability tests. We had to vet the tests. We had to run them. And it was a great partnership with the FDA that we did that. And we demonstrated very durable frames, very durable valves. One unpleasant surprise when we went for CE mark renewal, the notified body that had approved CoreValve to launch in Europe had said, maybe we weren't rigorous enough in our analysis. And they asked for additional testing, which was quite unusual. Normally, a CE renewal would be relatively straightforward, but when a larger company starts bringing things globally, they look at it a little differently. And the bar should be higher for people that are potentially launching in broader populations and creating a potentially more public health risk. In addition to running the program, one of my other roles at Medtronic is business development. And at the time we acquired CoreValve, there were already 7,000 implants. And so you not only are buying the company, you're buying the liability associated with these. And in our due diligence, we did a lot of durability testing before we decided to acquire the company. So be aware as an innovator that you need to dot your I's, cross your T's, make sure you've done the appropriate testing, you burn down risk. You don't go into human studies until you're confident there's going to be a benefit to those patients. It shouldn't be just to get early implants and drive your value. You shouldn't go to the human studies until you're confident they are going to benefit the patient in all likelihood, and you're going to learn something to advance the technology. But it's a complicated world, and when you're saving lives, it's a high-stakes game. We need to do the best we can. There's never been a perfect medical device. We've come really close many times, and then we'll continue to iterate with striving for perfection.
So I'm going to throw one more question out, and I think we want to try to open this up to the room a little bit too, as long as those microphones work. I think that's how we want to play. We talked a lot about, actually, I think about when we do the lab itself, there's 10 different things we look at, but there's 3 that in many respects either make or break a new technology in terms of thinking them through, 2 of which we've talked about. A little bit of intellectual property we talked about, which you brought up, Tim. Regulatory we've talked a lot about, which is core to this in terms of cultural. But the other one is a pathway for reimbursement, and Jason hinted at that as well in terms of where the money is. Say in the U.S., it's half the market basically. And I guess that first to Jason and then to Tim. I mean, Jason, from the startup perspective in terms of thinking about where to go, and then really, Tim, in terms of where you are and where you're going to leverage. I mean, we know that, take the different markets. The U.S. is wealthy in terms of what it can do. It has a lot of different programs. Granted, well over half the U.S. market is taxpayer financed, whereas most of the rest of the world is entirely taxpayer financed. But then there are exceptions to that too. So you look, China has sort of moved that way. The UK is mostly all taxpayer financed with a very heavily regulated system that's really a service with some independent. But then India is a cash economy for the most part, with other things that are put in place. Singapore is some mix of the two. So Jason, when you think about as someone is innovating and where the return is likely to be from the dollar side, assuming the IP and the regulatory looks good, what thoughts come to mind or advice do you give to your folks, or just decisions in terms of what you invest in, even just to go from that, just to try to even get it near a Series A round?
Yeah, there's a couple things. I think that we have a pretty broad basis for the companies that we look at for exactly that reason, because I can think of a path from therapeutics and medical devices to diagnostics and beyond for reimbursement. I can also see the risk and the likelihood shrinking and shrinking and shrinking as time goes on. And then I think of some of the other platform companies we invest in that are trying to, let's say, solve the bottlenecks or facilitate existing reimbursed products, or large corporates like Medtronic et al., who might have a very specific innovation problem that needs solving. So with my kind of financier hat on, when I'm balancing the risk in both, although we do have a healthy number of companies in our portfolio who are trying to develop their own therapeutic assets or medical devices and bring them to market and have them reimbursed, we do start to lean more towards those that are more enabling from like a B2B platform play, or maybe even clinical decision support tools, as opposed to like an in vitro diagnostic. So you start to make those kind of value judgments early on and say, okay, well, what do we think is most likely to generate a good exit for us as a fund? Okay, well, we could go for the go big or go home approach of you're going to get a reimbursed product on the market and it's going to be great and you're going to raise hundreds of millions and push it through, and maybe at some point around phase 2A, you might partner it out to somebody. Or there's the other side where we say, let's focus on what are some of those critical unmet needs of those B2B partners that you could be facilitating, the ones that already have the capital, the experience, and the path to market. And rather than necessarily creating your own device or your own asset that you want to bring all the way, perhaps you might want to be their intel inside, or the platform generating assets that another player might take forward. So I've been balancing that quite keenly at Start Codon, with guidance from our major corporate partners at Roche and Novartis for where we want to put our cash. Specifically for exactly what you said, is that even the best idea on paper, you might map out the IP strategy, go to market, the regulators might give you great advice, but if you don't have access to the capital, and in our cases, the team with the experience to bring it all the way through to reimbursed product, it's still extremely risky. So I don't want to say that I'm risk averse. I would like to say that I'm more pragmatic. A lot of the investments we make, we've got a portfolio of 27 companies now over the past 5 years. A lot of those investments are going more of the B2B route, trying to work as a partner for large corporates, large pharma, large medical device manufacturers, to be the facilitators, and then perhaps earn the right to play to develop their own opportunities. And just a quick note about the UK perspective when it comes to procurement by the NHS and reimbursement. It's a real funny beast. I have an anecdote I'd like to share where I don't want to say the UK is a developing country, but, since this is on the record, I will say that there's an opportunity for reverse innovation because of the let's say, price pressures placed on innovation by the NHS. It forces innovators to be really lean in their offering and make sure that it makes financial sense. And I have seen some innovations that have been deployed here with huge positive patient outcomes, and the qualities and everything line up, that could easily port over to the States. And I would say, even though they're relatively, let's say, inexpensive, you get the returns, and therefore there's a path to reimbursement because you're more likely to have it adopted, the insurers will like it, as well as the providers. So I think there's a big opportunity to use the UK as the best of two worlds. It is lean and mean from a healthcare system, but it's driven with innovation. If you have the capital and the patience, you can develop new products and offerings here that then port over to the States that can beat the competition, because They do what they say on the tin. They're highly effective, but they're cost efficient as well. So just want to put that plug out there that we're kind of like a second world, as it were, as opposed to a complete developing nation, and people can use that to their advantage.
Thanks. Tim, your thoughts?
Building upon what Jason said, great answer. Clinical value in the end, that's what we should all be focused on. It shouldn't be, we're going to bring a cool new technology to market with exotic materials and whiz-bang robotics. It's what clinical value are you going to provide? And Steve Molly, who is one of our former presidents, something he said that it took me a while to understand because I can be a bit slow at times. He said, only two things matter, so what and who cares? He's like, well, the so what is what clinical value are you providing and who will care about that? Is it the patient that cares about that? Is it the healthcare system? Is it the government? You know, the who cares part is, are you reducing complications? Are you getting better outcomes? Are you improving life expectancy? Does the hospital staff get to go home on time? Simple things like that. We found that it can be very stressful. A certain procedure, if it's unpredictable, people don't know if they'll be home for dinner or they'll be home for their child's soccer game or dance recital. So the people that care, it may be the hospital staff, it may be the insurance company. So find out where you can provide the value. And Earl Bakken, as part of the mission, said, you know, you should expect a fair profit. The fair profit fuels the machine. As a young engineer, I thought, we just design things. We shouldn't have to worry about selling them. And I, as an engineer, have never tried to sell something. But if we don't sell product, we don't get 10% back into R&D to develop new products. So we have to be thinking about, okay, what's the clinical value? How can we demonstrate that and then communicate that to our customer, whoever they might be, such that they can make an informed decision about whether to use our product or not.
If I could add one quick,
Jason, you had a follow-up?
So I just wanted to add one quick anecdote on the top of what Tim said for Q&A. Adam Brooks Hospital, one of the leading clinical research centers of excellence in the UK and Europe, also partially bankrupt, but that's a whole nother story. They have a radiology department for children where they were spending hours per child to get an image that would take 15 minutes because the children were so upset and distraught that their parents couldn't be in the room with them. And the way that these old NHS hospitals are set up, you know, your parents are down the corridor, their child is on their own, it's a scary place, it's cold, and they are basically freaking out. That's wasting hours and hours of time and driving up cost. They came up with a low-cost innovation, which I think is brilliant. They have a blue or pink ribbon. The child can choose which they like. The ribbon goes down the hall to where their parents are safely behind closed doors, and they can pull on the ribbon to know that they're not alone and their parents are still connected with them. It saved them millions of pounds per year. Lowest tech, biggest savings, brilliant. And I think, now obviously that's not a venture backable idea, but there's a lot of real low-hanging fruit like that. And that's one of the reasons why I've chosen to make the UK my home, is that I'm fascinated how innovations can be simple and effective.
That is fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah,
I wish I had a ribbon to someone in the audience sometimes, depending on what the question is.
Many times. I wish I had ribbons to a lot of people in the university, actually. Yeah. Let's open this up to the studio audience, as it were. I think there are some microphones around, so just put up your real hand as opposed to your Zoom hand, and we'll go from there.
While you're contemplating that, I have one quick question for Tim. We've talked about, you know, the early days of pacemakers, and then 10, 15 years ago with TAVR and how that's developed. It wouldn't really be a healthcare discussion today if we didn't mention AI. There we are, we did it. I'm curious how, when a broad new, call it technology or tool, comes upon us and can be used in so many different ways, how does a big company like Medtronic decide, let's do an experiment over here in Vietnam, or let's have a corporate AI department? How does something like that work? And I'm talking less about predictive AI, which you guys have already done a lot of good pioneering work, and more about generative AI.
Excellent question. It's a topic we discuss at length, and I think Ken Washington brought it up yesterday. Because we have, I think, more implanted computers than any other company in the world, we have tremendous potential access to information on arrhythmias, outcomes, patient activity, et cetera. So there's a fantastic opportunity to start mining that information and looking at how do we provide better care, maybe patient-specific care, and it raises a whole new set of questions related to patient privacy, who has access to that information. Because our devices generate tremendous amounts of information, whether they're implantable systems, ablation systems, robotics, doesn't mean that these data belong to Medtronic. So we need to partner with physicians, healthcare systems. How do we make this information portable? How do we combine it? Certain diseases have a lot of comorbidities. For example, atrial fibrillation is tied to hypertension, it's tied to diabetes, it's tied to obesity, all of these things. And you'd like to look at all the parameters associated with the patient. And so our goal is to try to bring that information together to better design our products and serve our patients. But it's a complex task. Information is available, and it's the task of how do we pool it in a way that benefits patients yet respects privacy.
Okay, that was your break to come up with questions.
While we're waiting for people to do questions, I have just 2 comments I'd like to make. It's Susan Alpert. One is, what I didn't mention before is that FDA and other regulators have special programs for working with innovators, for working with products that have the potential to really impact the public health, the kinds of things that we've been talking about. So there are special programs that will take those products and move them more quickly and interact more with you. One is a brand new program that FDA just started called TAP. And what it does is it allows you to create a more efficient pathway with more interaction to take your product forward if you have something really novel, if you have something that's challenging, if you have something for an unmet need in a population. So I didn't want to not mention that those are happening, and they happen in other regulators as well, that there's an opportunity to collaborate even more with the regulator. Again, they can't tell you what to do, but they can help on the pathway and make the process more interactive so that you get your answers when you need them and can move forward more quickly. So think about all of the programs that are available. The websites are not always so easy to use, but the programs are available and information is available. Use it.
Thanks a lot for your presentations. For Jason and Tim, I'm concerned about the new generations of medical device folks. You know, we have some in the audience here, and we have at least one very young child over here. You're talking about the very contrast in many ways across the world, your healthcare systems and so forth. How does that affect the ability for young kids, they're all young to me, to be inspired if you have a lot of overhead in your systems versus an open system? You mentioned, Jason, even within the universities and UK, there's such a different attitude and culture. So I don't know if that makes sense, but perhaps open up that for a question.
Jason?
So I'm trying to understand the question. So are you asking about how we ensure that we get good return for the investment? I'm sorry, maybe you could just rephrase.
No, I'm concerned that the younger generation, which we're going to rely on right as we get older, are properly inspired and not diminished in their ability to be innovative. And so we have, I think, a responsibility to inspire those folks. And if you say, well, yeah, you can be an entrepreneur, but you're only going to get 5% maybe if this happens and then this happens and that happens, versus a more open culture.
Understood. Well, I would say that, to get to the 27 companies that we've backed, and this is by design because our fund is limited, we've looked at over 1,500 opportunities. from across the UK. We only do British investments. And the vast majority of those were from young people, ages 20 into their, say, mid to late 30s. So I think that there's kind of an increase, an upswell of interest in entrepreneurship. And so I'm actually very encouraged by the signs that I see around me, both in the UK and when I travel abroad, when I'm traveling across Europe. I give a good example. I was a judge on a competition in Serbia, in Belgrade. Now, Serbia is not known for innovation, and they're still recovering from the horrors of the wars years ago. But the hunger you can see in the eyes of these young people, we're talking college undergrads, all wanting just a bit of advice, a bit of guidance, but finding ways to make their innovations work, even though they didn't have access to the venture capital that you might have in Boston or the Bay Area. And they are the talented individuals of tomorrow. So I think that the hurdles are actually being reduced overall. I see a lot of international travel. Like, globalization is not just for large companies, it's for startups as well. Talent is freely flowing. I think that as much as we do focus on things like equity and incentivization, they're being sorted. There was a review that I was a part of by the UK government last year talking about how the equity stakes for most universities are too high, and there's an active conversation to see those reduced, as well as inviting more US VCs and European VCs back to the UK to invest in the next generation. I see the same when I go to the States as well, particularly for what they call those, it's Minnesota, the flyover states, which I don't believe in at all. I think that's where innovation actually is alive. We need to look beyond the traditional towers and silos of innovation where everybody considers Boston, New York, and the Bay to be it. Minnesota, Cambridge, the rest of the world, innovation and enthusiasm abounds. Entrepreneurship is alive and well. Capital is now starting to flow. Talent is flowing as well. And I'm more excited now than I've ever been. So I'm not worried for the future. I think we just got to get out the way and let the young people do their thing.
Yeah, fantastic answer. And innovation takes a lot of energy. And it's exciting now. I think we probably have more young innovators than we had maybe 20 years ago, where people focus, I want to be a scientist, I want to be an engineer. Many people now, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to be a CEO. And my advice to them is fantastic. Make sure you have tools in your toolkit that would enable that. Either you come up with the idea and find people to work with, or you get training in medicine, engineering, science, so that you can bring something to the party. If we look at the biggest innovators in the world, like Bill Gates, he was writing programs, and then he advances on. People aren't, and the venture community can say, you're probably not willing to take a bet, place a bet on a young, motivated person that has no track record and no experience. But if they come with an idea, that's completely different. And so I'm optimistic as well. And as leaders in the industry, we have to find a way to break down barriers. And the innovators as well have to be willing to push and work hard and make their ideas a reality. Because innovation is multifactorial, and just having an idea isn't enough. It's how do I turn that idea into a product or a therapy? Who can help me do that? One of my daughters commented at one point, she said, I don't want to work as hard as you when I grow up, Dad. I went, I'm not really working. This is what I like to do. Like, this is fun. These are my friends. I've got Dr. Izio there, who's been one of my greatest inspirations. We go fishing together. Like, we talk about work. We talk about life. We talk about family. It's just make it so that you're not thinking about a work-life balance. It's just, this is what I do. This is what I love. And you'll be able to put so much more energy into it.
Yeah, I guess kind of related, especially to enabling entrepreneurs and, developing a business case, anyone can do it, but developing a relevant business case. You hinted at it, Tim, you hinted at it, Susan. Evaluating risk benefit is much easier said than done. And so I wonder, in a very early stage, as someone's trying to develop that, can they gain audience with Medtronic? Can you speak to routes of engagement for an entrepreneur with, say, Medtronic through an innovation week? And then I also was curious, Susan, are there any routes to gain access to FDA and early conversations around technology ideas?
I can jump in before Susan does. In my business development role, people ask, when's the right time to talk to Medtronic? And my advice is come talk to me anytime. We're very careful to draw lines so that I'm not bringing the inventors in the room when you share your idea with me. I will give you free, friendly advice. And the most common advice is, what's the clinical value, and then what are the biggest risks associated with this? I think burn down those risks early. People often want to ignore what the biggest challenges are so they can continue to feel good about their idea. Like, think about what are the 3 things that the critics will say, this won't work because of X, Y, and Z. Transcatheter heart valves, the critics said, they can't work because these aortic valves are heavily calcified, you'll never break them open. Well, in fact, you can break them open and they do work. But that was the mindset, is this is not possible. So with that mindset, go demonstrate it is possible. Until you do, people may not be willing to invest or follow down. But think about it, what are the 3 biggest risks, and then talk to people you trust. You can talk to people in the room that have worked with me before. Is Tim an upright guy? Will he steal your ideas? Will he not? And I'm happy to give free advice. I always look at things as an engineer and want to see people be successful. If their success builds success at Medtronic, great. If it doesn't and it helps patients, great. We're happy to see healthcare advance. And we can't be a part of everything, but we'd love to be a part of at least providing advice and being a part of the journey on many technologies. Susan?
Yeah, so in answer to the question about access to the regulators, first of all, the regulator treats everybody equal. You don't have to be a Medtronic to get access to the reviewers at FDA. You can be a startup, be early, be your first device, be the first thing you want to talk about. So it's open access to everyone. There's a process, but they will have meetings with you, and more than one if you need them. They have 2 issues. You have to ask in advance and give them the information that you want to talk about so they can prepare. The second is, for the same questions, they only do 1 meeting. You can have a high general meeting and then more specific on an issue of engineering or an issue of the clinical trial, things like that. But you have to think about that planning. But yes, you can have those interactions, and you want to have them. And you want to go early. If you've got something really novel, you want to go early. You want to get them excited about it, because they can be excited about new things. And they can then be thinking about novel ways to move that product forward. So there's a real opportunity to interact with your regulators. The FDA is really good at it, and many of the other regulators are, as I mentioned, beginning to get better at the interaction. But don't be afraid of them. I have some little companies I work with that's like, I don't want to talk to the FDA. I'm afraid. If you're afraid to talk to the FDA, what are you developing? So
you should be excited to talk to the FDA. Say, together we can help more patients. This is how.
What he said.
We have a number of former employees that went to work at the FDA, and people in the industry are working in industry, engineers and scientists, because they want to help patients. And you, of course, have to feed your family and get a reasonable income, but people don't come to the company because they're thinking, I'm going to go to Medtronic to get paid. They come to Medtronic because they want to be a part of something big and important and help patients, just like at Abbott, Boston, Edwards. People are there to help patients. The FDA is there to help patients. They ask very good questions, and they have a tough job because we'll think about a product for years. We deliver thousands of pages of documents to them, and they get 3 to 6 months to decide, is this safe for use in the U.S. public? That's a tall task. And the more trust you can build, answer their questions early and often. When we acquired CoreValve, there were more than 100 unanswered questions from the FDA. And they were good questions. So you have to answer those questions, because they're deciding, is this safe for the public or not? And so view them as partners. They're very bright, motivated, and we're all working in this industry to help patients.
I really like how you boiled everything down to the so what and the who cares. Could you repeat your kind of formulations for what constitutes so what?
Yeah, the so what is what do you bring that's unique? It could be a variety of things. It could be a faster procedure. It could be a new biomaterial, a new way of thinking, a new AI algorithm. So the so what is what novel idea or approach do you have, and then who will care about that? And it took me a while. In simplest terms, it's that. What do you bring to the party, and who cares about what you bring to the party, and who might be able to act upon that, benefit from that, whether it's patients, regulators, et cetera.
Thank you. I work in the area of reimbursement consulting with medical technology companies, and I love people like Linda and Mac McKean who work in the regulatory world with FDA. But the world of working with CMS, and I suspect half the people here don't know what CMS stands for, is just completely different. And it's kind of the ugly cousin of the FDA. And in many respects, they don't want to talk to industry. Their motivations for controlling healthcare costs, in effect, stimulate innovation in a lot of circumstances. Yeah. And I think entrepreneurs just really need to be keenly aware of how they really function and think differently. Mm-hmm. I've had the benefit of working with people out. My first international trip was to Japan in February 2012 with Art and people from Greater MSP and the Minnesota Department of Economic Development. And it was really eye-opening. And I don't remember the name of the physician. He's a very highly recognized physician leader in Japan. But we each had an opportunity to speak to an audience of about 500 Japanese medtech entrepreneurs. And I was about to go up and start my presentation, and this physician said, "Now everyone in the audience, you really need to listen to this guy because this is really different than the way we do things in Japan." And the crowd was just silent throughout the whole thing. And he told me afterwards, "Well, Ed, we don't even have a word for insurance in Japan, so they just don't understand how this works in the U.S. market." And for companies who want to commercialize in the U.S., it's extremely difficult for them to figure out how to navigate through not only CMS, but the 5 major health plan companies that really control access to services in the U.S. So we continually encourage companies to really think about that and incorporate that early in your business planning, because I've said a number of times, it takes about this much evidence to get something cleared by the FDA, this much if you have to go to the American Medical Association, get a CPT code for a new technology, to describe a new service, and it takes about this much information sometimes to convince a health plan to cover a new technology. So you really need to incorporate and think about these things very early in the process. And I enjoy listening to Jason, too. I talked to a company and a prospective client in Cambridge yesterday, and we're going through the checklist of things that they need to understand about how to get reimbursed in the U.S. market, and they kept saying, "Really, do we have to do that? We don't have to do that in the U.K., and we run into that all the time. Because in places like the UK and other countries, once you get cleared by a regulatory agency, you've got your ticket to ride. You're a covered service in those countries, but the FDA employs hundreds of times more people than the FDA to manage this bureaucracy, which is running out of money in 8 to 10 years, and their motivations are completely different, and you really need to figure out how you're going to deal with that circumstance before you get too far in your business planning."
Just add a comment on top of that is kind of boils down to the who cares again, is what value you're bringing, how can your customer monetize it, whether it's the government. There's pressure on the U.S. government and all the governments to provide better access to health care, the latest technologies, safe, effective products. And so be thinking about how you can demonstrate that in your clinical trial from the very beginning as you're designing it.
One other comment, again, it's a little supplement. This is essentially what we do in the valuation lab. We look at reimbursement, we look at intellectual property, we look at regulatory, not to say no, but to basically prepare people for the journey that's required to go to CMS, to go to the major private payers, to think about the different companies, to think about the pivots too. There's sometimes where innovators are, they know in the case of the device world, man, well, it's going to be class 3, it's going to be PMA, it's going to be awesome. And you're like, maybe it doesn't need to be class 3. Do you realize the additional clinical trial cost to get there, the different evidentiary piece to get there? The fact that United Health Group wants to see 3 different peer-reviewed articles that you don't have the budget to pay for, rather than maybe 1 if it's a class 2 predicate. Those things are learnable, but one reason why we even have the Val Lab is not so much to say no, but to basically prepare a generation of future inventors that Art talked about and Jason mentioned, to just have in the back of their mind as they invent, oh, it didn't work the first time, but the second, third time, I know what I need to do. And it'll just speed innovation for everyone's benefit.
Yeah, maybe I can add real quickly on that, Steve. The Val Lab working with our companies last year and again this year, it has been fantastic to see the change that has hit the mind of the founders, because particularly in the UK, there's a lot of tech push. Everybody invents something new, and they're really in love with their idea, and they think it's fantastic. And the whole world, I just have to convince them, but eventually they'll get it because I'm brilliant, so therefore this new device is also as brilliant as I am. But nobody cares. Back to Tim's point, nobody cares if it doesn't tick all the boxes about is it reimbursable? Can you actually get it to the market, like at a price point that makes sense, plus the outcomes that you're looking for? You have to take all that into account. You may have a high impact publication, you may have 15 patents, but if nobody cares and nobody wants what you're developing, it doesn't matter if it's addressing an unmet need. It won't be commercially viable. And so you have to have that in mind, that path to reimbursement, that path to your market from day one. And most innovators I meet, at least on this side of the pond, don't. So that's why the Val Lab has been so good to help them really refocus on what matters.
Hi, panel member. Thank you very much for very interesting discussion today. I'm in a very unique position today. I come from India. I work in UK. I'm attending conference here in US. So I wanted to bring forward a particular case where we have been working on a European funded project, which was to design robot for stroke rehabilitation. And this project was running for 3 years. We conducted clinical trial, and we wanted to take it forward for commercialization. And in UK, the system is like, it's very much guideline driven. So NICE guideline, it suggests that robot assisted rehabilitation is not cost effective. The problem is we had the Brexit, so they pull out the funding. We wanted to get funding within the UK, and this is the guideline. And we were looking for like any other alternative mode of funding where we could take it, because after all, we designed a robot which is very intelligent-based robot to substitute or to augment conducting the rehabilitation, the long therapy giving to the patient, which will eventually be helping the mankind. But the problem is there is no source of funding. So looking for collaboration within the US where, potentially we could have used the resources, but there is hardly any kind of, mode of funding or collaboration. So anything, your idea, like if you wanted to take something which eventually we know that could be useful for mankind at the end, and because of these barriers, we are not able to take forward. So how do you suggest that we can take out this kind of innovation, overall globally?
I mean, you can make a general comment. So this robot, was it for radio ablation? Was that?
It's for stroke rehabilitation, so particularly during the acute phase of stroke, people, those who become paralyzed, not able to move it, the recommendation is NICE guideline. The recommendation, they say that you need to give 3 hours of physical movement every day for 5 days a week. This is the recommendation of NICE guideline there. There are no physiotherapies available. It's not cost effective. But at the same time, they are saying that, we are not going to invest in robot-assisted kind of rehabilitation. So that's the problem. I mean, if there was a mechanism where we can collaborate with US, where the funding could be there, then we could have, taken it. Because eventually we know that this technology is going to come up, in a few years' time. There is nothing existing that we worked on the device, which is available either, in Europe or in UK or in US, but there is no way to take it out. So the question is how to collaborate or how to take it forward.
Okay, good question. I can put on my Medtronic business development hat, and I don't work in the robotic space or in stroke, but connecting with people that are in that business and are looking for next generation innovations, and they'll look at how many patients can you help? Is it a sustainable business model? And robotics often are at a high capital equipment cost, so what's the business model? Is it a capital sale? Is there some disposable associated with it? And not that it's all driven by money, but you're looking at how to make it sustainable and provide more access to patients. And so my recommendation is for companies that are providing stroke care, stroke rehabilitation, meeting with them and communicating how you can provide unique value. Because certainly it's challenging for a physical therapist to do multiple hours a day of therapy with someone. So it sounds like there's a really important unmet clinical need. And then how do you advance that and find out who can be your partner in that regard? But it's often finding the right partner and then the groups with the financial backing, whether it's the large corporation or a venture fund that sees your vision and will allow it to go forward. And maybe it's launched as an independent company and product, or maybe it's part of a larger company over time. Hopefully that was it.
Jason, I'm going to give you a very brief opportunity for the last word because I'm getting the look.
Yeah. So just building on what Tim said, I think that assuming all those things are correct and it is addressing an unmet need and it's a viable space and it's fundable, then you're in the right position for what many companies end up in coming out of the UK with innovation, is that you've done the hard work, you think you've got a prospect, and I think you should find the right team and collaborators in the States to work with you. It may be that you incorporate in the UK and then flip to the States. It could be that you might be incorporate in the States from day one. You're in the right environment. I'm sure you're at this conference today because you're looking to meet people. So hopefully someone in the audience raises their hand and says that they might know somebody or they themselves can help you. Just give everybody an idea. It takes, on average, 17 years for an innovation to be adopted by the NHS after it's gone through clinical trial. 17 years. So you're probably at maybe year 1 or 2 of that. So I think you're right on track. What typically happens is people go to the States, it gets adopted, it gets proven out, and then when it becomes a bit mainstream, then it flips back to the UK. So don't keep beating your head against a brick wall when you know on 17 years on average is what you're up against. Try to focus on the US, and I'm sure there's collaborators there that you can speak to.
Thank you, Jason. Well, I just want to take this time to just thank our wonderful hosts here for the Design for Medical Devices Conference, Will, Paul, Art, all the people who put this together, Tim, Jason, Tom, that have to make this all just a wonderful event that we do it. If you're like this conversation, want to see them more, both the on the record and off the record version, we do this every month, so look again for the Medical Industry Leadership Institute, our Valuation Lab Chat series. We started it in COVID and keep it going, and they come out every month, and you'll see this one posted later. If there's things that you heard about or want to follow up after, that's fine. And if you want to go to Cambridge with me and Jason in July and some of the other folks, come on along. It's 2 weeks, and you get to take a look at some really incredible technologies, learn a lot of stuff along the way, and go punting and hopefully not fall over in the river Cam. Thank you so much. Take care.